Although there are many great dives from shore, there are at least 5 practical advantages that make boat dives popular. The first is that boats give you access to sites that are difficult or impossible to reach diving from shore. Second, boats allow you to dive in better conditions because it's often clearer or calmer farther from shore than inshore. Boat diving is often easier than shore diving because you avoid long walks with gear, long surface swims, and have easier entries and exits. And this leads to a fourth advantage, which is that boat diving is easier on your gear than many forms of shore diving. A fifth and probably best advantage is that boat diving is fun. You meet new people and have a good time with friends while sharing your passion for diving and the underwater world. If that were the only advantage of boat diving, you would probably still boat dive as much as you could. If you've never been around boats before, nautical terminology can make you feel like you've stepped over a border instead of onto a boat. So before we get into boating and boating procedures, let's start with what you call various boat parts. To avoid confusion on a vessel, you give or receive directions in relation to the boat. Forward, or fore, is toward the front or bow of the boat. Astern, or aft, means towards the back of the boat, which is called the stern. The right side of the boat is the starboard side, and the left side is the port side. If it helps, remember that port and left both have only 4 letters. Windward is whatever direction wind is coming from, and leeward, which is sometimes pronounced leeward, is the downwind side. Amidships means in the middle of the boat, and that can be relative to forward and aft or to starboard and port. Aloft is overhead, on a mast or in the rigging, while below means below deck. Above deck and on deck mean, not surprisingly, on the deck. The boat's toilet or restroom is called the head. And while you can get great food on many vessels, boats don't have kitchens, they have galleys. Salons are the living seating areas. The pilot may operate the boat from an elevated bridge or wheelhouse. The transom is the flat portion of the boat that makes up the stern end. And rails are guards or barriers that keep you from falling overboard. The gunwale is the upper edge of the side of a boat. This is what the rail mounts on if the boat has a rail. The cylinder rack is where you secure your cylinder and usually where you set up your gear. And the entry-exit areas are where you enter and exit the water for a dive. On some boats, you may enter and exit from different places, such as a swim step near the water at the stern. There are literally hundreds of different types of boats, and probably all of them have been used for diving at one time or another. No matter what type, however, there are 3 characteristics you look for in a vessel used for diving. The first is ample deck space for storing and setting up your gear. Ample is a relative term, of course, depending upon how big the boat is, how much gear you have, or how far you have to go from dock to dive. At times, a smaller vessel with more deck space is a better choice than a larger vessel with less. The second characteristic is stability, which is important for comfort and gearing up when there are waves. The third feature is power. A dive boat has to have adequate power to move everyone and all their gear at a reasonable speed. Again, this is relative. You don't need as much power when you're going a short distance over flat water versus a long way over rough sea. Although the captain and crew are responsible for operating the vessel, as a PADI boat diver, you should be familiar with basic boating rules and procedures. This video gives you an overview of some of the basics, and you'll learn more detail from your instructor and the PADI Boat Diver Manual. But if you plan to operate a vessel yourself, you should complete a locally sanctioned boating course. Waterways are roads without lanes or markings, which makes the international rules of the road important for safe navigation. The first of these is that when 2 vessels approach each other, the vessel to starboard has way. The vessel to port is burdened. must give way by slowing or steering. For this reason, the area from amidship's bow down the starboard side is the danger zone. Approaching vessels in this area have way. If another vessel is approaching and its bearing relative to yours doesn't change, you're on a collision course. This alerts the captain to alter course or speed.
In most waterways, vessels pass each other port to port. Starboard to starboard is acceptable when required, if both captains understand and agree to it.
There are two exceptions to starboard vessel always having way. The first is that a vessel under sail has way over vessel under engine power. The second is that when there's a significant difference in size and maneuverability of two vessels, the more steerable one accommodates the larger one, even if it would normally have way. Besides these basic rules of the road, different regions may have additional or modified rules, as well as variations in the navigational markings discussed in the PADI Boat Diver Manual. Your instructor may cover some that apply in your local area. You can usually also find this information published by local government agencies in print or online. Most areas have regulations stipulating mandatory safety equipment aboard private and commercial vessels. The requirements vary, and your instructor will brief you on anything unique required in your local area. Regardless of where you are, though, there are 8 pieces of basic safety equipment you typically find on a boat used for diving. The first is PFDs, or personal flotation devices, sometimes called life preservers. The type required will depend on where you are, and there should be at least one for every person on board. You should know where to find them and how to put them on. By the way, BCDs are not recognized PFDs. The second is one or more fire extinguishers. They should be ABC rated, which addresses the type of fires likely on a boat. And they should be easily accessible in places near but away from likely fire sources where someone can safely retrieve them for use. A boat should have a sound signaling device, visual distress signals, and a bilge pump. While passengers will use PFDs or fire extinguishers, these pieces of safety equipment are used almost exclusively by the crew. 2 more pieces of safety equipment you typically find on a dive boat are a first aid kit and an emergency oxygen kit. Both are usually stored someplace out of the way and dry, yet clearly marked and accessible by passengers and crew. The preferred type of emergency oxygen system for diving emergencies is the non-resuscitator demand valve, with free flow capability for unresponsive patients. To learn about using first aid kits and emergency oxygen, it's recommended that you complete the Emergency First Response Primary and Secondary Care Program and the PADI Rescue Diver course.
The final piece of safety equipment is a marine radio.
Vessels use these for routine communication, such as while navigating, but they're also for getting help. In an emergency, switch to Channel 16, which is reserved for emergencies in most areas. If you can't reach help by radio, and if you're close to shore, try your cell phone. You'll learn several aspects of boating basics in the PADI Boat Diver Manual. 2 skills that are central to most boat dives are anchoring and mooring. Anchoring obviously involves securing the boat's position with an anchor, while mooring involves tying up to a permanent anchor called a mooring. On a charter dive boat, anchoring and mooring are crew duties. When anchoring, the captain motors slowly to the anchor point, checking to be sure the area is clear of boaters and divers. Once the boat's in place, the crew drops anchor and pays out anchor line for a length about 3 times the depth before tying off. This amount of scope usually gives the anchor good holding power. If there's not much current or wind, the captain may determine that less is adequate.
That's good, hold there.
When it's time to leave or weigh anchor, the captain begins by checking to be sure all divers are aboard and the area is clear. Crew takes up slack as the captain motors toward the anchor, then hauls the anchor up with the anchor winch or by hand if it's a small vessel with a small anchor. Mooring is faster and easier than anchoring, and you don't need to worry about scope. Moorings differ regionally, but generally your boat will have a short line, 3 to 5 meters or 10 to 15 feet, with a quick shackle threaded through the anchor tackle and tied to the anchor cleat. The captain checks for divers and boaters while approaching, and the crew hooks the line trailing from the mooring and brings it aboard under the railing. This way, it only puts tension on the anchor tackle. He snaps the boat line's shackle to the mooring line and casts everything overboard, and that's all there is to it. When it's time to go, the captain checks the area is clear and motors toward the mooring with the crew taking up slack. The crewmen release the shackle and cast off the mooring line, and the captain lets the boat drift away to avoid tangling the line in the propellers. Although you'll learn a lot about boat basics during the PADI Boat Diver course, again, it's a diver course, not a boating course. If you'll be operating a vessel as captain or crew, whether private or commercial, complete a local sanctioned boater safety course. Now let's look specifically at diving from a boat, starting with getting ready to dive. It's always important to inspect your gear before a dive and to use a checklist to be sure you have everything. But it's especially important before a boat dive because once you're out there, you either have what you need or you miss the dive. There's no quick detour to a dive center for a repair or forgotten item. Gear can mix together on a busy dive boat, so mark your gear so you can tell which is yours. If you're taking your own cylinder, have it filled ahead of time. Since deck space may be limited, pack your bag so what you need first is on top. If you'll set up your scuba gear before putting on your wetsuit, for example, put your BCD and regulator on top of your suit. Try to pack everything in your gear bag, though you'll probably put personal items in a small separate bag that you can stow aboard someplace dry. Don't forget your certification card, logbook, and any required documents you may need, like a passport. It's a great idea to have basic spare parts and toolkit kept in a sturdy plastic box, like a small toolbox, tackle box, or dry box. See the PADI Boat Diver Manual for a list of suggested supplies and tools for it. As a rule of thumb, you need more spare stuff on private and small boats than large charter dive boats. This is because charter dive boats are customer service oriented and more likely to have basic spares and tools that keep you from missing a dive. In any case, you can learn more about equipment preparation and minor repairs and adjustments in the PADI Equipment Specialist course. Chances are most of your boat diving will be from a charter dive boat. Although boarding and pre-dive procedures vary somewhat, they're mostly similar from one boat to the next. Unless you're told otherwise, plan to arrive at least 30 minutes before departure.
Hey, can I give you a hand with that, young lady?
Sure you can.
Okay.
Got it? Super heavy.
No problem.
Ask the dive master or crew where to stow your gear if you're not sure and get it put away.
All right.
If the dive boat doesn't supply cylinders or you bring your own anyway, secure it properly. Cylinders will tumble on a rolling boat, which can damage gear, the boat, and cause injuries. Find out where to stow personal items that you want to keep dry. Anything left on the open deck will probably get wet.
This is awesome.
Yeah, it's really pretty. I like it here a lot.
Hey guys, I hate to disturb you and break up your conversation here, but I need
Boat rules aren't arbitrary, so pay attention to where you should or shouldn't put things. If the crew asks you to keep an area clear, there's a good reason. Sign the boat roster, and if appropriate on that boat, put your name on your cylinder. If it's a short ride to the dive site, you'll probably set your gear up immediately, which is easier to do dockside than underway. The crew or dive master may give a pre-departure briefing, a pre-dive briefing, or both. Stop and listen to all briefings closely. This not only assures you're listening, it's common courtesy. Briefings are important for planning your fun as well as for planning your safety. Whether conducted before departure or immediately before the dive, the typical boat dive briefing has 4 parts. The dive master will usually provide a facilities orientation, which tells you where to find the head, rules about where to put things, off-limit areas, where to gear up, and where to find PFDs and other safety equipment. A general characteristics discussion addresses a lot of information about the dive, including what to expect, bottom composition, temperature, depth, hazards, visibility, and so on. It usually includes entry and exit recommendations and a suggested dive plan from which you and your buddy determine your individual plans. Buddy team considerations checks to be sure everyone has a dive buddy and to allow you and others to find one if you don't. Usually, the crew will try to put someone inexperienced with the area buddied with someone who is. Finally, communication, emergency procedures, and general safety rules reviews. Among other things, hand signals to signal OK when you surface, emergency and emergency recall procedures, the roles of the dive master and crew, and the procedures for checking out of and back into the boat. Gearing up varies from the size of the boat you're diving from and how long the ride to the dive site. Basically, the smaller the boat, the shorter the trip, and the rougher the conditions, the more you gear up before the boat leaves the dock. Small vessels like inflatables and hard hull day boats don't have much space, so you may set up all your gear and partially don your exposure suit dockside. After anchoring, you may put your scuba units with inflated BCDs on a gear line while you finish gearing up. You then enter the water, put your gear on, and conduct your pre-dive safety check at the surface. On large boats, you more commonly don't gear up until you're moored at the dive site. After the dive master briefs you about site conditions, depths, and so on, and after you and your buddy have planned your dive. Together, assemble your scuba unit, if you didn't already, stow your clothes in someplace dry, and put on your exposure suit. Again, try to work out of your bag and avoid spreading out too much. There's usually a container for rinsing and defogging your mask. When the dive master says you're clear to enter the water, put your scuba unit on with your buddy and do your pre-dive safety check. Don't put your fins on until you're ready to enter and you're right next to the entry area. Trying to walk with fins while on board a boat is a good way to fall. If you're diving from a private boat rather than a commercial charter dive boat, be sure to leave someone aboard who knows how to operate the boat. This is important in an emergency and in case the anchor drags or the boat releases from the mooring. Be sure to fly a locally recognized diver's flag. On big dive boats, the dive master usually conducts a pre-dive roll call from the boat roster. This roll call is important for the safety of all divers, including you, because the dive master calls roll again after the dive before the boat departs. It is an important precaution against accidentally leaving someone at the dive site. To avoid any confusion later, there are 3 important rules during roll calls. First, never answer for someone else, even if you're sure the person's aboard. Second, never have someone answer for you. Third, speak up if you don't hear your name. If you're not on the roll before the dive, they won't know if you're aboard after the dive.